Hey guys, what's up? It's Levi, back with another 2 builds for solo dungeons. For the past 4 weeks you guys have seen me cover builds, and even more builds. I know this might not be appealing to all of you, but I really wanted to make multiple builds available for players to choose from. Now that we have that covered with 7 different builds, I want you to know that for my next video we will take a break from solo dungeon builds and continue with a different topic. I am curious to what you guys think of this video and the previous videos that cover builds, and whether you would like to see more similar videos in the future, so please share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to check out all the builds that have been covered so far, you can find a link to the playlist in the description below. In today's video I will be covering the light crossbow and the blood leather, which are both affordable builds that don't require high level masteries, meaning anyone can get started with just tier 4 weapons. As usual, we will also take a look at alternative weapons within these mastery trees, as well as options in armor if you want to change things up. Check the timestamps in the description below if you are only interested in one of the 2 weapons that will be covered in this video. Let's get going to today's first build, which features the light crossbow together with a guardian helmet, a cleric robe, scholar sandals and Thetford cape. For the offhand I use the Musak. For PvE we want to have soups for health regen and a stack of tier 4 potion pots for the bosses. As for potential PvP encounters, I like to take the sandwich for more health, and the potion of choice with this build is the healing potion. In this build your cape and weapon make for damage and knockbacks, while your armor, offhand, food and potion make for sustainability. Both the Musak and the cleric robe have healing modifiers, which make your heal stronger. Meaning both your healing potion and guardian helmet's emergency healing skill will heal for more because of this. And since they work with percentage heal as their base healing, we take the sandwich as our PvP food with this build to increase our health pool, making for even bigger heals and more sustainability from these sources. I have to admit that I've always been very alien towards crossbows, whilst being very intrigued by them at the very same time. Even whilst trying this build out, the playstyle of it didn't feel natural to me. Nonetheless, I was very interested in learning it and enjoyed it more as I got used to it. It seems there are a few tricks you can pull off with this build, and depending on your passive, your playstyle also gets modified quite a bit, in which you can either go for resets on your skills or more knockbacks. The biggest thing I had to get used to, however, was being ranged while having skills that locked me in place when I used them. Let's move on to the build breakdown and see what the light crossbow really is about. When we look at what items this build consists of, we can see the only artifact item is the offhand, the Musak, which is a mid-tier artifact and is priced accordingly. The Thetford cape adds to the clearing speed whilst being one of the cheaper options, making for a build that's on the cheaper side of solo dungeon build choices. No energy issues whatsoever with this build. Despite that, still some energy safety on the scholar sandals for bosses that take longer to kill. The scholar sandals are also a solid pick for PvP encounters, whilst remaining affordable. Starting with the light crossbow, you want to have auto fire on your queue. It's important you complete the channel with the skill in order to proc the explosion and get some AoE out of it. It's one of your 2 AoE sources in this build, therefore try to position yourself in such a way that guarantees a full channel. I like taking the auto fire over the explosive bolt for PvP purposes, but the explosive bolt is a very good option as well, which guarantees AoE damage with lower cooldown. On the W I like to take knockback shot. Together with your passive, the skill makes for quite the knockbacks, keeping enemies away from you. You also get a 50% attack speed buff for 5 seconds, which is good to have since your base attack speed with the light crossbow is very slow. The knockback shot also comes in handy when you have to push enemies into each other for your exploding shot's AoE damage. For boss fights that are difficult, you can swap out the knockback shot for the Sunder shot. As for the E skill on the light crossbow, we have the exploding shot, which has been mentioned a couple times already. The exploding shot deals damage to the selected target and places a bomb upon them, which explodes after a couple seconds and deals AoE damage. So you want to make sure your target is around other mobs. For this you either have to select the right target to place the bomb on to begin with, or you can use your knockback shot to knock your target back into the pack. One thing you have to know about the bomb is that if you kill the target that you put the bomb on before it explodes, the bomb won't detonate, so make sure not to kill the target with the bomb too quickly. As for the passive, it's nice to have forceful bolts, which knocks the enemy away and interrupts their spell casting every 3 auto attacks you do. This is more of a PvP option, yet the passive I would personally take. If you want faster clearing, the well prepared passive will speed things up and help with killing bosses quicker. Your guardian helmet has the emergency heal skill, which heals you for 10% of your max health and removes any damage over time effects. This heal is increased by healing bonus stats, which this build has. If you use the emergency heal skill after you have used your sandwich or everlasting spirit shield, it will heal for even more. But don't forget, the skill removes dots as well. So if a cursed staff user pops his dead curse whilst you have 4 stacks of failed curse, you might want to remove those stacks even if you don't need the heal of the skill per se. This helmet makes for a lot of sustainability in different ways, so don't be afraid to use it for different purposes. The passive you want to take on your Guardian helmet is toughness for reduced incoming damage. Then for the chest piece we have the Cleric Robe, which we have covered previously in the Great Fire Staff build. Once you activate the Everlasting Spirit skill and take damage within 1.5 seconds, you get the Everlasting Spirit Shield, which makes you invincible and increases your damage and heal output for 3 seconds. So if you use your helmet during this 3-second window, it will heal for even more. Now keep in mind the Everlasting Spirit skill does have rather high cooldown, so try to use it wisely. Most ideally you want to save it for PvP encounters only, but this doesn't mean you should get knocked in PvE because you opted not to use it. The passive you want to take on your Cleric Robe is Aggression for increased damage and heal power, which is great because you actually benefit from both the damage and the heal bonus with this build, whilst other builds often benefit from only one of the two. And as we have used in many builds already, this build also features the Scholar Sandals. There are just too many benefits to the Scholar Sandals which make them a good option for many builds. The Focused Run increases your movement speed, makes you immune to movement impairing effects, and regenerates energy. A lot of nice features both in PvE and PvP whilst being a regular item that's affordable. Where some boot skills can be purged, the Focused Run can't be, which makes for a lot of reposition potential during PvP encounters. By the time your Focused Run is finished, your knockback shot should be available again as well as your auto fire. Just like your Cleric Robe, you also want to take the Aggression passive on your Scholar Sandals for increased damage and heal power. If you want to change things up about this build, you can replace the Light Crossbow by the Weeping Repeater. If you wish to trade Clear Speed for more escape potential, you can take the Undead Cape instead of the Thetford Cape. The Scholar Sandals can be replaced by Demon Boots, although this is a more expensive option, which might get nerfed in the near future. You can also experiment with different foods and offhands with this build for new results or playstyles unique to you. Moving on to the second build, which features the Bloodleather together with Mistcaller. As for our armors, we have a Stalker Hood, Stalker Jacket, Scholar Sandals, and as our cape we once again take the Thetford Cape. For PvE we take Soups for Health Regen and a stack of Tier 4 Poison Potions for the bosses. For PvP encounters, an Invisibility Potion along with Omelette for cooldowns. The Dagger Mastery has seen a rise in popularity lately, with the Deathgivers currently being meta for Hellgates and the regular dagger being used to farm entire group dungeons alone. If you wish to learn more about how you can solo group dungeons, you should definitely check out the video made by a good friend of mine, which will be in the description below. The Bloodleather build feels amazing to play in solo dungeons due to its insane mobility, damage and speed, and because the build consists of many offensive items, your clear speed is very good as well. The only thing I had difficulties with were bosses, which were slightly more difficult with this build compared to other builds. Energy issues seem to be present as well, which is why I swapped out my leather shoes for Scholar Sandals. I do want to point out that with this much mobility you have bigger chances of escaping dungeon divers than you do with other builds, which is why I went with an invisibility potion to increase those chances even more. If you want to fight back rather than escape, perhaps you should take a different potion. Moving on to the build breakdown for this Bloodleather solo dungeon build. Starting with the Bloodleather, on your Q you want to have Deadly Swipe, which is a short range jump that does AoE damage. It also gives you a stack of the Assassin Spirit buff per enemy hit, which stacks up to 3 times and increases your damage by 6% for every stack. What's cool about the Deadly Swipe is that you can use it in between packs as well for a slight movement boost, so you kind of want to use your Q continuously throughout your dungeon run. If you have difficulties with certain bosses, swap your Deadly Swipe out for Sunder Armor, which in my experience make boss fights much easier. On your W you want to have Throwing Blades, which is yet another AoE skill that gives you a damage and movement speed buff based on the amount of targets hit. If you can, try to hit 3 mobs with the Throwing Blades for maximum buff effects. As for your E, you have the very popular Lunging Stab skill, which is a dash that does damage to all enemies hit, just like the Carving Sword's special skill. What makes the Lunging Stabs unique is that it does even more damage to targets below 40% health, serving as a finisher skill. If you hit at least one target that's below 40% health, all your cooldowns also get reduced by 10 seconds, which is an insane perk to have. As for the passive on the Bloodleather, I personally like to take Deep Cuts. You do a surprising amount of auto attacks with this build, and I feel like any of the passives would do, so there is no good or wrong. Instead, there is personal preference, so choose the passive on the Bloodleather you like the most. With this build we use the Stalker Hood. If you use the Mortal Agony skill when mobs are below 50% health, their resistances get reduced. With all the damage buffs this build has and the bonus damage on your E, you will most likely one-shot all mobs below 40% throughout your runs. You can of course also use the Mortal Agony skill for the 20% damage buff alone, since it has relatively low cooldown. The passive I like to take on Stalker Hood is the Quick Tinker for cooldown reduction. The Stalker hood is accompanied by the Stalker jacket for the style points, but of course also its electric field skill as well, which is an AoE around you that does damage. Although the cooldown is on the higher side, try to use the skill as often as possible to speed things up. Just like the Stalker hood, I also like to take the Quick Tinker passive on the Stalker jacket for cooldown reduction. As for the boots, once again the Scholar Sandals. Now I did try this build out with leather shoes for a refreshing sprint first, but immediately noticed this build is very energy hungry, so after a run or 3 I went back to swap it out for the Scholar Sandals. The focused run covers the energy need of this build and also makes for a great PvP option that will increase your escape potential. The passive you want to take on your Scholar Sandals is Aggression for increased damage. And if you want to change things up about this build, you can swap out your Stalker hood for Scholar Cowl and your Scholar Sandals for Demon Boots. This way you'll have energy covered on your helmet and have more escape potential on your boots. It would also be wise to change your Thetford cape to an Undead cape if you do this, to increase your chances even more. I looked into the other daggers, but I can't really see one that would be good for solo dungeons. Perhaps the one-handed dagger, but if you are to go for that, why not go for group dungeons instead? Once again, the video made by Rusty on how you can solo group dungeons with a one-handed dagger is in the description below. Make sure to check it out. Another 2 awesome builds covered for solo dungeons. At this point it's getting hard to choose what my favorite is, because I really enjoyed the mobility and speed of the Blood Leather build, and I feel like I don't want to return to anything slower. I hope these builds help you get going and bring value to you. Don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on notifications if you like my videos and would like to see more of it. You can also join the Levi Discord server, which is a friendly, helpful community. The link to the Discord server can be found in the description below. As always, I wish you good luck in your adventures, and maybe I'll see you soon.